Moving on from virtual reality, we now come to in person reality. The next session on pioneering socially responsible business in the emerging world order is curated by the Confederation of Indian Industry, CII. Mr. Banmali Agarwal, President, Infrastructure, Defense and Aerospace and Global Corporate Affairs, Tata Sons Private Limited, will serve as session chair. Our honored speakers at this session are Mr. Farhad Forbes, Co-Chairman, Forbes Marshall and Global Chairman, Family Business Network International, Dr. Catherine Ibata Irons, Vincent DePaul, Professor of Political Economy at DePaul University, and award-winning author of Pandemic Medicine, Mr. Alexei Arpianen, CEO and board member, TT Gaskets Finland, and Mr. R. Gopalan, IAS, Director, TVS Motor Company, and the former Secretary of Economic Affairs in the Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Greetings, everyone, and may I please call you up to the stage now. Thank you.
It's really indeed a pleasure to be in Pune. I see some really distinguished gentlemen and ladies sitting in the audience. It's a privilege to be here with everyone, and particularly in this session, which is about pioneering socially responsible businesses in the emerging world order. Please don't worry, I won't stand here and bore you with a speech unilaterally. We do have a very distinguished panel to which I will just come to. But just to introduce the session briefly and then to get on with it, I started by turning to ChatGPT to just ask the question, how do you define sustainability? So the first thing, of course, ChatGPT does is to ask you that, are you a human or are you a robot? That's ironical, but interesting. After I was able to convince ChatGPT that I was a human, it gave me a definition. And I must say, it was pretty interesting. It says, sustainability is the ability to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It is based on the principles of social, economic, and environmental balance. At the outset, I must say I was very impressed on looking at this definition as given by ChatGPT. The reason why I'm highlighting this is to connect it with the session that we have and to talk about businesses in this context of sustainability. I would argue that gone are the days when business could, in a sense, be disconnected with what's happening in society. What is it that government is doing? What is it that's happening to people? What is it that is happening to all the customers that it impacts and all the people around the facilities, etc., that businesses have, it impacts? And if the only objective of the business was to cater to shareholder interest. I think by now we all well recognize that the purpose of business, the cause of business, the interest of business have to be well beyond that. The question is, how much well beyond that? And of course, we'll be discussing all of that with the audience, with the panelists that we have. The other point that I would like to kind of leave on the table, and I did ask this question as well as to ChatGPT, that is this model of perpetual economic growth or perpetual growth, how do you justify that or juxtaposition that with the definition of sustainability? And I do understand it's not a very easy question to answer, but that is indeed something that businesses will have to look at in the run-up to being sustainable organizations, but at the same time fulfilling this need for almost constant and perpetual economic growth. Now we can look at this and either be morose around all that is not going round in our country, in the world, and so on, or we can look at some of the green shoots that are indeed taking place, that are the good work that is indeed happening, and how do we build upon it further. When we had the pre-discussion of the panel before, we felt that it was very important to emphasize all the good work and all the initiatives that are already happening and how do we take that further. Let's just take India, because I do firmly believe that India is indeed taking the lead in how do you build a sustainable business and a sustainable economy. Take, for example, renewable energy. The share of renewable energy just about a decade ago, and mind you, India being an extremely coal-heavy dependent country, our share of generation in terms of installed capacity of renewable energy about a decade ago was just about 12%. Today, it is over 30%. Today, this will cross maybe about 40 or 50% in less than a decade. In energy terms, green energy did not contribute for more than 9% about a decade ago. Today, it is almost 15%. Friends, for a country like India, which is so sensitive to pricing and things like that, to achieve these milestones is no mean achievement. Let's take a look at electric vehicles. I can speak about it from the context of, let's say, the Tata Group. We thought that by maybe around 2030, the share of electric vehicles versus ICE vehicles, that transition would happen somewhere around 2030. But you know what? As of today, we believe that date would be advanced maybe by 2 or even 3 years. That is how rapidly the country, the customers, government policy, manufacturers, and so on are embracing this entire change. The last point I'd make in this context is that corporates are coming out and becoming bold and making firm commitments as to when are they going to achieve the net zero target, even in very difficult to abate sectors like steel and power and automotive and buildings and so on and so forth. Again, I'm not wanting to make a plug for the Tata Group, but just to make the point that a group that has steel and power and automobiles and construction, which is one of the most difficult areas to abate, has said that by 2045, we will be net zero. It's a line that has been drawn in the sand. 2045 is not like 100 years out there. It is less than 20 years out there, or little about over 20 years out there. And therefore, I would say, and there are a number of other Indian industries as well that I think are making such commitments. The point I'm making is that we are making progress. The business world is also coming out there to make its commitment towards a sustainable development. And let's discuss how do we take this entire agenda even further. Now, to discuss this, we have a very distinguished panel with us. To begin with, we have Dr. Catherine Ibata Arons. She is the chair and the executive of Society of Vincent de Paul Professors, DePaul University, USA. She has written a number of books. Her book, Beyond Techno-Nationalism, which is Biomedical Innovation and Entrepreneurship in Asia, which analyzes national policy and firm-level strategy in China, India, Japan, and Singapore. She has also written her previous book, which was Innovation and Entrepreneurship in Japan, Politics, Organizations, and High Technology Firms. This was a previous book that she has written. She's received her BA in International Relations from the Loyola University, Chicago, and a PhD in Political Economy from the Northwestern University. Thank you so much for being here with us in person, and we look forward to a discussion with you. We also have with us Mr. Gopalan, an IAS and director of TVS Motor Company. He's been the former Secretary of Economic Affairs in the Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Mr. Gopalan is on the board of a number of Indian companies. He has handled matters related to capital markets, infrastructure, finance, G20, World Bank, etc., etc. The list goes on. But I think his perspective on the interface between government and business, I think, would be very interesting and encouraging for us to hear. I'd also like to welcome Mr. Alexei Arpiainen. He is the CEO and board member of TT Gaskets from Finland. He is the co-owner of TT Gaskets, which is a third-generation Finland-based industrial sealing provider for industries around the world. He is currently the vice chairman of the industrial committee in the Tampere Chamber of Commerce. And again, during the pre-session that we had, he was explaining to us as to how can business proactively work with government to find suitable solutions and so on. And I'm sure we'll just be discussing some of that during our discussion. And last but not the least, certainly not the least, is Mr. our own Farhad Forbes, who is the co-chairman of Forbes Marshall. He is also the global chairman of the Family Business Network International. As you know, Family Business Network International is the world's leading family business organization. It was founded in 89 and is headquartered in Lausanne, Switzerland. FBN International brings together over 3,600 family businesses, 16,000 individual members, including 5,000 next generation members, and it has many chapters across different countries. And the reason I think why family businesses perhaps are a little more important and can have a little more impact, because the decision making perhaps in family businesses is maybe a relatively easier in terms of taking bold steps for the future relative to other publicly listed and other business organizations. And we will hear that also when we discuss it along with Farhad. With that, I'd like to start by asking a question to Dr. Catherine. And I think, Dr. Catherine, your specialization, of course, is in the field of biomedical sciences, and you deal a lot with innovation. We all know the importance of medicines, the need for the whole world, the pricing of medicines, and all of that. But the question would be the need for responsible innovation in driving sustainability in areas like biopharmaceuticals, and how does one move from words to action in this crucial area? May I request you for your thoughts? And before you begin, the way we'll do it is I'll go around the panel for about 5 minutes in the first round. I'll go around the panel again for about 5 minutes, and after that, throw it open to the audience for question during the last 15 minutes. So, Dr. Catherine, may we have your thoughts, please?
Thank you. Well, good, my microphone is working. Thank you very much for your opening remarks, and I really enjoyed our preparation panel. I was very inspired by the founder of Infosys, Mr. Murthy, the other night, with his use of stories to make a more broadly societal impact. And so I have some stories. I'd like to start with one, and that is in 2016, I was here, not in Pune, but in Delhi, interviewing biopharmaceutical and biotech entrepreneurs for my Stanford University book that you kindly mentioned, Beyond Techno-Nationalism, including writing a case study on Biocon's Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, if you've heard of her. And I was, as background, interviewing one of her early venture capital investors, and he told me, this was news to me, but I'm sure it's common knowledge to most Indians who are in business, that the WTO TRIPS Accord, which is the global intellectual property rights regime that buttresses patents controlling the pharmaceutical industry and allowing particularly Western companies to profit and sometimes profiteer, as we've seen in the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, that they were essentially behind the creation of this and started creating the WTO TRIPS before the World Trade Organization was even established. But we agreed that we were going to talk about something positive, so I was secondly delighted last night when I found out that at the head of the Indian National Initiative to challenge this and to protect and conserve the fundamental biopharmaceutical knowledge that derives from traditional Indian medicine, particularly Ayurveda, was led by none other than Dr. Marsharkar, who is the president of PIC. So I was delighted and honored to know that I would be in his presence today. So that's my opening story. But I wanted to segue into, so I feel like I'm the resident Japan specialist here. And for that book, I was also researching the corporate social responsibility that was really counterintuitive and puzzling on the part of Takeda Pharmaceutical. And so they have done a lot of things that are completely decoupled from their profit portfolio, including having a medicinal garden nestled in the northern mountains of Kyoto that cost them over $1 million per year to maintain. And they have it as what in Japanese would call nen no tame, which is a concept called just in case. It has completely nothing to do with their market potential for any of these organic sources of biomaterials, but it's there as a seed bank and a rhizome bank just in case of something that might come up in the future, such as a global pandemic where you might need to have quick access to these biomaterials. The other thing that Takeda has been involved in is GHIT, which is a venture capital private public partnership that also includes the Gates Foundation's Wellcome Trust, but also the Health and Welfare Ministry of Japan. But really uniquely, the Japanese bureaucrats have stepped back and they have no authority to decide who gets selected for these investments, which is very unusual for Japan. And so again, this is an emerging organization that is doing something new and interesting, is supported by government, is supported by transnational foundations, but also is market focused. So looking at market focused solutions to bring medicines to the developing world, again, thinking of the future and future human capital, maybe not even in the generations where these executives are going to still be living, but maybe the generation of their children's children, and developing consumer markets in the developing world by keeping children healthy and really investing in sharing compound pools through the GHIT funding portfolio to bring both diagnostics but also treatments that are underdeveloped in the big pharma of the Western world to the developing world through funding these social entrepreneurial organizations that are developing tuberculosis, malaria, schistosomiasis, which affects millions and millions of children in the global south. These are drug compounds that are underutilized by the big pharma because it's not profitable. So this is not making anybody any real money, but it's saving lives. And I think I've probably expired my 5 minutes, so I'll stop there.
Thank you so much indeed. I'm sure we'll come back to it because I think there's just so much of connect and interest in what you just said, along with the larger subject of responsible business. Mr. Gopalan, if I may turn to you and just kind of get your thoughts on how would you look at the role of government in creating an enabling environment for scaling socially responsible businesses.
Thanks to the Pune International Center for giving me this opportunity, and to all my co-panelists, such great, work they have done, and it's a pleasure to be part of this gathering today. Now, when I looked at this topic, I was looking at how the emerging world order is going at this point in time. What are the facets that would really impact our ability to get into socially responsible manner, various issues, attend to them? ESG is just one thing which you mentioned. A lot of inequality is going around, and how do we ensure that inequality is addressed? If you are socially very conscious, how is it going to be addressed as we go along in our programs? Of course, there are other loss of sovereignty, the getting into more inward-looking kind of a scenario which we get into, and trade nearshoring and those kind of. But the most important issues, as I mentioned, are the ESG as on today, as well as the inequality issue. How are you going to address them if you are going to be socially conscious? Now, you mentioned, Mr. Agarwala, about the stakeholders. There are any number of stakeholders which the business has to look into. But to me, government is the most important stakeholder they have got to, for the reason that they have influence on many other stakeholders, which the businesses may not be directly impacting, but they would facilitate interaction with those stakeholders. So government is a very, very important stakeholder in this. So I was just thinking how the businesses should look at this. You mentioned about how to do sustainably the businesses as we go along. And in my view, the businesses in EMEs, at least the emerging market economies, should think that profit is important, but not at the cost of their core beliefs and values, the business's core beliefs and values. And to me, how do you ensure that these core beliefs and values seep into the organization to everyone down below is going to be a challenge which the businesses have to face, but that is something others will certainly cover. Getting into government, which is how the government would or should make businesses or interact with the businesses so that socially they are conscious, and socially they are responsible, they have to create definitely a culture of social responsiveness. And that, how do they do it? Maybe some incentives, some recognition. So people, the businesses become socially conscious that that's their responsibility is something which government has a role to instill in them. Then there are any number of good practices around this country. I come from TVS, and we have got the Srinivasan Trust, which started 30 years ago. But I mean, when the word CSR was just coming up, we had taken up the work of CSR in a very meaningful way. So there are any number of such organizations in this country. Now, what are the best practices they have adopted, and how to disseminate such best practices across the country so that others will be in a position to take cue from that and then go forward with their own sui generis way of looking into what kind of programs they should adopt. Now, most importantly, government creates laws and regulations, and we should see that they are evolved in such a way that becomes easy for the business to adopt them and work on them. There are any number of issues like labor codes are there, CSR regulation, there are any number of such things which are there, but how they are done in a responsible manner so that the businesses are keen to adopt them and then go forward. It should not be something which very idealistic and thrust from the top, where the businesses will not be in a position to implement them because of various other factors. Now, there is a ESG funding, which is becoming another important area where government has to come up with enabling environment, whether to the market regulator or through other financial regulators. They should see that this funding becomes meaningful and they are adapted in a very, very big manner in this country. Now, there are standards which is the responsibility of the government. Establishing standards is responsibility of the government. Now, these standards should take into account the level of development of this country and the needs of the people. Now, and at the same time, what is required to make our products internationally competitive. Now, this is a very fine balance, and this balance has to be walked by the government, of course, with the help of industry, but that is a primary responsibility, in my view, of the government. Now, lastly, there are a few other things, but one of the things which I am very fond of is looking at how the government facilitates the NGOs to perform their functions very, very effectively. Let me give you one or two facets what we came across. So, which will, there are any number of such instances everywhere. But see, we are great believer in afforestation. Okay. Now, if you have to go for afforestation, then you have to have additional lands made available to the forest department if you are going to take up the forest areas for afforestation purposes. Now, there I need the government in a big way to find out the alternate lands so that these alternate lands can be made available to the department for afforestation purposes. Now, second, these forests have to be looked after. So, how do you do that? One good way of doing that is ensure that the local community are able to enjoy the usufructs of those forests, and there must be some code or some amount of practice which must be cleared by the government before these activities are taken forward. There I need the government. Second, we do a lot of water bodies rejuvenation, and then the field channels which carry water for irrigation purposes. Now, they are all blocked, occupied illegally. Now, without the government's help, I will not be in a position to remove them and then make these water bodies good enough for water to flow through. Okay, and these are some of the, I can go on adding things endlessly, but I need the government to really ensure that NGOs are able to do their activities in a big way. I stop with this. The question time or in the second round, I'll be in a position to cover a few other issues as well.
Thank you so much. I think you made a very interesting point. And as you might have seen, we decided intentionally not to just focus on ESG, but what is, let's say, ESG plus. And one of the points I think, sir, that you made, which was about social inequalities, particularly in the context of a country like India, and the role that business can play to be addressing social inequalities. Just give it a thought, and I think we'll kind of come back to that question a little later. But Farhad, if I may turn to you, the point that I was making earlier, that do you think for family-owned businesses, is it easier, is it simpler to drive an agenda which is beyond just profits, which talks about social change? Because, and what I'm alluding to is that for a publicly listed company, the pressure on quarterly numbers, et cetera, it just gets to be at times unbearable. So your thoughts on the role of family businesses driving social change, generally, maybe across the world, and particularly in the context of India?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Banmali. Um, with regard to talking about family business, I'd just like to mention a few things which make family businesses somewhat unique, and why, to address your point specifically, why family businesses can, in fact, address precisely these issues, perhaps with a slightly different lens. As you rightly say, family businesses are known for taking a long-term approach where one thinks in generations rather than quarters. Family businesses generally have a sense of purpose, a purpose which is sort of driven by legacy and the identity of the family with the business and the community in which it operates as well. So it's not just the business, but also, the legacy which actually translates to how they interact with the community. Many family businesses have been involved with CSR well before the word CSR was coined, including, the Tata Group. Mr. Gopalan, you mentioned about the TVS Group, and there are similar examples in India and all over the world. Third, a sense of values generally, where family values more often influence company values. And because the family is associated with a firm on a long-term basis, those company values tend to prevail. So if you have the right values in place, it's possible for this to be sustainable in the longer run. And finally, that desire to preserve the legacy that goes beyond just business and the pursuit of profit. So it's this holistic view which family businesses can have, and where we do not have the pressures of the short-term objectives. But coming back to this thing of short-term objectives, whether you're a family firm or a non-family firm, we have to think about the whole ecosystem today. You cannot just think about what happens in your own company. And you gave examples of the Tata Group being involved with so many different businesses. And those businesses have to be functioning with the long term in view as well. And if we do not have a sustainable ecosystem, our businesses will not be sustainable also in the long term. If you take a developing country like India, the problems which we have in India cannot be solved by government alone. We, as a vital element in the whole economy, in the ecosystem, have to be responsible. We have to take a position on some of these issues which go beyond just corporate performance, our own performance in our companies. And so given that in family business, you tend to have the view that you want to pass on the business to your next generation, and I think Alexei can speak about this as well. By the way, Alexei is also a board member on the International FBN board, and in fact, I've had the privilege to work with him on the board for a few years now. And I think you can speak to this as well, not just from an Indian context, but a global context. So this view of passing on the business to your next generation in hopefully better shape than when you inherited it. And we have to look at this now, not just about passing on the business, but can you pass on not only the business, but an ecosystem which is in better shape? We have in FBN, in Family Business Network, we have a partnership with UNCTAD. We formed this about 3 years ago, and essentially to address the 17 SDGs, to get family businesses across the world to address the 17 SDGs. Now, these SDGs, if you look at them, many of them are in contradiction to one another. When you work on poverty reduction, you sometimes will have to have development as part of that. So you cannot not have development. You need to have development. But how can you make that development responsible? So one of the things which we do in family business is we deal with paradoxes. And I'll give you some examples. We tend to be value tradition, but you also have to, with tradition, have innovation. And if you look at family businesses across the world, the German Mittelstand are very good examples, and we have many others in other parts of the world where you balance tradition, which is the legacy of the past, but where you also can be extremely innovative, where you have financial prudence, but also take prudent risks, where you have, and a big paradox which we have to manage is managing family and business. And sometimes the requirements of running a good family are contradictory to what is required in a good business. And so what we have to deal with is that we have to deal with both. It's not a question of or, it's a question of and. And as a result, to deal with the issue of profit and purpose. And when I say purpose, I include in this sustainability. So we can deal with these, because we can deal with paradox, we should be in a position to also address the need for being a successful business. And to be a successful business, you need to make profits, but you can also have purpose. I'll stop at that, and then we can take more on.
Thank you so much, Farhad. I think the point about legacy that you mentioned, and I think I'll just leave it out there, that if businesses also were to see that, what would they be remembered as going ahead? If that would be the lens with which one would be looking at running a business, does that change the way you do business? The second point that you made, which I found very interesting, Farhad, about family and business, and even if it's not family owned, but if you looked at the people within a business as quote unquote family, and how do you therefore balance the interests of those versus, let's say, just the commercial interests? Phenomenal insights, Farhad. If I may turn to you, Alexei. Finland, the Nordic countries in general, and Finland in particular, just comes across as a country that has achieved that holy grail of the perfect balance between innovation, economic prosperity, sustainability, living with the environment, everything. So is this discussion meaningless as far as you are concerned? And what does it really mean from your perspective, Alexei, and how do you look at it? And I'd like you to particularly speak about the importance of not just businesses, but for countries. And I think the point that Mr. Gopalan was also making, the countries and the businesses to be in sync at every level. Again, as I was referring to the Nordics and Finland in particular. Your thoughts, Alexei?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Banmali, and thank you very much for the organizers for having me here. It's a great privilege and honor. And just to give you a bit of background on Finland, and thank you, by the way, for the beautiful words, how you perceive Finland. I have understood that the population of Pune area has just surpassed the population of Finland, so we're only 5.5 million people. Just to give you context, and in the whole of Scandinavia, we are 30 million people. But, you know, sometimes being small can help you to be nimble and agile and flexible. And when it comes to Finland and who we are today, we need to look a little bit into the past and into our geography. So perhaps most of you know already that Finland is a country of many lakes. We have 180,000 lakes. If you look at the mass, 75% of the land mass is covered by forest. So we truly are the people from the forest. So if for one country it becomes very natural to be close to the nature, proud of the nature, and living together with the nature, that is Finland. Now, Finland has been a rather poor nation until the 1900s, and from the 1940s, the country has developed very quickly to become one of the most developed countries in the world. And to give you this background, I think that it will help you to understand where we are coming from. Now, it's a lot thanks to our educational system. We have thought that the only way to find new heights for the country, to find new well-being for the country, has been to educate our people and give equal opportunities for everybody, with the idea that anybody could be the president of Finland. And just to show you how non-hierarchical we are in Finland, we have this saying that the president is just 2 phone calls away from anybody. So that comes to show what kind of nation we are. Now, there are some particular other things that have shaped us, and I think that why we can be quite close to sustainability, or not even having to think about so much sustainability, is that as it's part of our DNA, it comes from who we are. If you look at Finnish people, what's happening in July, by the way, we have a really short summer, it's only 3 months, June, July, and August. I understand that here it's a bit longer, and I'm very happy for you about that. But what happens, the whole country shuts down for July. Everybody goes to their summer cottages, and we have 500,000 summer cottages. People need to go back to the nature. They need to be on the lakesides, breathing fresh air and charge their batteries. So it's omnipresent, the nature in Finland. What has really shaped an innovation and maybe thriving collaboration between businesses and the government has also been that we have been blessed with the Nokia story. That really helped us to believe that we can be larger than our size. With the troubles we had with Nokia finding its way into the future, we had a lot of learnings, how to run international operations, how to believe in ourselves, and how to combine technology and manufacturing. Finland has been always very strong with manufacturing, and thanks to the educational investments, we have a lot of engineers like you do in India as well. We are people who are very fond of figuring out how things are working and putting in place new solutions. So with that being said, I did an ethos exercise with the family business chapter in Finland 5 years ago, and I asked, we have 500 families, by the way, it's a very thriving and active organization, exactly what Farhad was discussing about on a global level. And I asked that, what is it that we would really like to do? What is the thing that combining all of us? And 2 things came about. One was, of course, that how can we as a chapter help to educate our members and the society to help succession happen, to have family businesses thriving and dynamic forces, engaging with the society with answers, not only asking for things, but rather providing solutions or engaging the society. And the second thing was really that how can we help Finland to thrive? How can we help everybody to have more well-being in this nation? I believe that the FBN International is doing this on a global level. So we are there, of course, for the benefit of the family businesses, but at the same time, just like Farad said, it's not and or, it's definitely an and question. It's embedded in who we are. And the second decisive moment, and I'll finish with that, was that when I was working on the ownership strategy of our own family business that is turning 80 years this year, I asked for my own father that, why are we here? What are we doing? Is there a bigger purpose in this? And he said that he had asked the same question in the 1970s from his father. And Finnish people being known for not being too talkative, he had answered, we are here for the nation. We're here for the well-being of the nation. And I thought, okay, that's enough said. Now I understand it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexei. I think, as you can hear from the applause, there are two things important. One, not being too talkative. I don't know whether that's also important for us. But the second, I think your point on education, and maybe particularly even primary education of children, because all of a sudden, I don't think you get these ideas once you are, very mature, and I think that's a very important point. Let's just kind of go through another round before we throw it open to the audience. And Dr. Catherine, if I may come back to you. In your opening remarks, you spoke about innovation, open markets, free markets, and so on. And in that context, may I push you that do you think the idea of innovation, ideas, and open markets, do they go together, or do they need to be regulated? Does there need to be government intervention in it to make sure that a good idea, a good solution, particularly, let's say, in biomedicine, is available to one and all, given the subject that we are discussing? Your thoughts, please.
Well, that's a very difficult and very important question. And in fact, I grappled with part of that in my previous book, Pandemic Medicine, and I am asking similar questions. What is this dynamic between innovation versus regulation? Because we know that in highly regulated countries such as France and Japan, you still have some innovation, but it's not at the wild, West cowboy variety that you see in the United States and India. So what is this dynamic, and how can you get that algorithm tweaked just the right way to have just enough innovation so you are encouraging young, bright, entrepreneurial-minded folks to take those risks and get out there in the market, but you are providing the governmental support so that they don't go crazy and destroy the environment that is so preciously delicate as we're facing it now. And I'd like to tell another story. And so I've been doing some field work in Hawaii, because one of the interesting things that I found in the process of writing this previous book, Pandemic Medicine, which is all about asking why did we have this global innovation crisis when we had so much capacity to produce vaccines, and yet there wasn't a lot of sharing going on. And I'm referring specifically to the United States and China in that regard, where we sort of had this reversion to a nationalized, not health diplomacy, but nationalized health, and sort of keeping those vaccine discoveries just for our citizens, and then if there's some left over, we'll share. Whereas India had the opposite approach, vaccinated some portion of your citizens, then shared with Bhutan, then shared with your neighbors. So I was in Hawaii. I was in a meeting with the former governor, Ige, and this was in the height of the global pandemic in 2020, 2021. Because we were compelled to teach online, I and my husband decided, the heck with Chicago, which also has a very brief summer. Dead of winter, I decided, let's pull up, shop and go live in Hawaii, and I can just teach remotely from there. And so I started doing some research for this new project, which is about innovation and regulation, talking to the governor, and this was right in the middle of the shutdown of the global supply chain. And do you know how many days food supply the entire archipelago of Hawaii has? It's the most remote populated series of islands in the entire world, 2,500 miles from anywhere else. How long? 5 days. So if those ships don't arrive, the citizens starve within a few weeks. And so Hawaii had this epiphany that they absolutely need food sovereignty. And so some local organizations, I like to say the ones led by the aunties and uncles, have come together. And one that is has been very meaningful and impactful for me and my students who I brought to do community service-based learning is a place called Malama Loko'ea. And it's a Hawaiian term for protect the fish ponds. And in ancient pre-contact Hawaii, they were a self-sustaining food sovereign nation. And they had all the food that they needed, and in fact, they were able to share food with their neighbors, let's say Polynesia and Micronesia. And so what Malama Loko'ea is doing is that it's started a alternative high school program that is teaching young people the value of working in the soil, the value of working in the ocean watersheds, not maybe as your full-time career, but on the weekends when you have time to really engage with this idea of bringing life from the soil and how important it is to live in balance with the soil. And so it's nurturing a whole new generation of young people who are not disconnected from nature, which unfortunately is the problem in most of the United States, I have to say. You know, it's not like that in Finland, it's not like that in Japan, where most of it is forest cover. And as we learned from the Minister of Finance from Bhutan the other night, they have it in their constitution, I don't know if Finland does or not, that at least 60% of the land must be covered with forest. We have nothing like that in the United States, with the exception of the national parks. But my point about Malama Loko'ea is that it's not only working with local communities, but it's reaching out and working with other communities in other countries, Australia, Micronesia, Polynesia, and it's bringing these ideas together in analogous thinking, establishing these transnational networks, again, to teach young people that there's value in being in balance with the nature. And that is so critical in terms of maintaining that biodiversity that we're talking about in the SDGs. And I'm going to pause here, and then when we get to the open Q&A, I'd like to talk a little bit about this interesting overlap between those spaces that are considered sacred and the protection and conservation of medicinal plant biodiversity, which, by the way, is the fundamental source of all materials for all global biopharmaceuticals. And if we don't protect those, we don't protect ourselves from the next pandemic, which unfortunately seems to be coming in terms of the zoonosis that's going on with avian flu. But we're going to stay positive, so I won't talk about that today.
Thank you, Dr. Catherine. Mr. Gopalan, if I may turn to you and you made this observation about inequality and NGOs. And if I may ask that in your experience, the whole inequality dimension is in a sense left to the government to address. You know, is it through taxation? Is it through redistribution of wealth, etc.? But what, in your view, is the role of businesses in addressing social inequality? What is it that businesses can do? And if I could also, in the context of NGOs, so we have CSR funding spending by businesses, we have government doing different things, and then we have NGOs. Is there a way to gel this together so that it gets to be more effective rather than, you know, a lot of dispersed activities going all around? Your thoughts?
Yeah, very good question. Well, why in EMEs, emerging market economies, the businesses have to be much more socially conscious is because government cannot provide public goods to everyone in the country. And therefore, the businesses the government has to reach out to the business, which the government does. And that's where the industry or business is able to chip in to do what they can do. One thing I would advise business is that please get into those activities which the government is already in, and dovetail your activities along with the government. For instance, if there's a school, you have to do a school building you have got to do, or you got to a dispensary, health dispensary you got to refurbish, or you got to get into irrigation, afforestation, those kind of things you have to get into. Please do that, because that's how we will strengthen the hands of government, and providing these resources to the people and enable people to carry out their livelihood in a very seamlessly good manner, you will be enabling those people to really come up in life and reduce the level of inequality. The important thing businesses have to do, as we do also in our Srinivasan Trust, is enable them to catch fish, not give them fish. Now, how do you do that? We, with our own network, there are any number of village level products which can be produced by these women under the self-help group. And these products, we enable them to market through internet and those kind of facilities. And from nowhere, we are now having close to about 2.5 crores this year of turnover of marketing these kind of village level products. So we are enabling them to, catch fish. So this is another thing which you should do to ensure that inequality is in a position to get, reduced. The next thing which you should do is that, we always go and then say, we do this and get out. No. When you are there, you should look into whatever you are doing a program on, do it holistically, and also ensure that you are able to do maintenance of them over a period of time, so that those projects really are able to get on their own before you move on to some other project. So curtail your enthusiasm to get into place A, B, C, D, E. Go to place A or place B. Ensure that you establish the sustainability of the programs which you are implementing there, and then move on to other places. That's advice. That's what I learned from what we are doing. That is very, very effective as far as in this country. So then how do we do that? First of all, you should earn the trust of the people. So there I found that the people look at you not with suspicion if you are able to dovetail your programs with the government programs and take the people into confidence and tell them what you really want and make them debate and come back to you, or sit with them in the debate and then make them get to know from them what is that they require, and you are able to work your programs on those expectations, then you succeed. And you succeed in a very, very big way. So there, as he also mentioned, that TVS is in some sense is a family owned kind of a business. There we find that the values of the family really gets into and the reputation also precedes you before you go to the village. TVS used to be one where you take care of the workers and they'll take care of your business. That's the kind of thing they have been following for quite this thing. So you take care of the people in a way that they are able to carry on their daily activities without any hindrance, and people will certainly enable your projects to succeed as we go along in the villages. That's something we have found out very clearly through our experience. So you have got to be oriented, motivated, and you should align yourself to what is happening on ground, what other programs are, and enable people to catch fish, not throw fish at them.
I think very interesting, and I think if, as you said, I think if organizations even just focused on their own employees and so on, and kind of carried the agenda forward, it will go a long way. Farhad, if I may turn to you, and I think Dr. Catherine also made this point about maybe global alliances and working together internationally. And in your thoughts, when you're meeting people across the world, is there a case to exchange ideas with other organizations elsewhere in the world in terms of what's happening there? Is there something that we could imbibe? Is there something that we could take across? Your thoughts on that, please.
Sure. Yeah, we talk about this a lot. And I mentioned about this partnership which we have with the United Nations, with UNCTAD. And the whole idea here is that, if we have to make an impact and if we have to scale, you have to do things collectively. So one of the things that we are trying to see is that how do we frame the narrative to motivate family businesses, and I'm saying family businesses because talking about it from, a set of where you have to start somewhere, and yes, it can be a model later for others, but we start with our own network where we have our own members. How do we frame the narrative such that they can recognize the importance, but more than that, how can they take some concrete action? So when you look at the whole aspect of sustainability, that's a very broad term. How do families view sustainability to take some action on it, which is meaningful? And yes, the ESG narrative, which is now very prevalent all over the world, including in India. But again, how do you break that down to make it relevant? And one of the things that we started doing, and actually this came out of one of our sessions which we had recently in January in Geneva, I think, Alexei, you were there at it, was where there were people in the room who said, well, what is relevant in Sweden or Finland is different from what is relevant in a country like Bangladesh or in India. But at the same time, there are still things we can do which address ESGs, okay, everywhere. So looking at it from a family business perspective, you first start with governance, good governance. If you don't have good family governance and you don't have good business governance, you will not have a business which will be successful in the long term. So the business will not be sustainable. So start with that. Next, look at what you as a firm, no matter where you are, okay, whether you're in Sweden, in Finland, or in India, look at what we can do on issues which are social issues in each of our locations. And many of our businesses now are multinational. You may have a Swedish business which has factories in India and Bangladesh, etc. Look at what each of those locations, where you have your presence, what is relevant for social issues in those communities. And those are all part of the UN SDGs, part of those 17 UN SDGs. And at the same time, think globally, beyond your community as well. And that's where it comes in when you're talking about climate, when you're talking about environment. What you do in your own factories, what you do in your own lifestyle affects that in some way. So what we're trying to do is to educate our members to also start thinking about sustainable ways of addressing environmental issues. So that becomes a practical, tangible way to take this forward. And what we try and do is we learn from one another. Examples that we may have success in one area with one family firm is something which can be shared with others. And if you collectively then do things and have this constant system of improving things and learning from one another, we can really then truly have impact.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm going to turn to you, Alexei, as the last question and then kind of throw it open to the audience for any questions that you might have of the panelists. Alexei, again, I mean, the way you explained it, and as I said earlier, Finland, businesses in Finland, in a sense, a kind of benchmark. What's the next step? What do you see over the next 10 years or 15 years? Where would you be driving your business, which you are now taking over as the third generation and handing over to your next generation? What is it that you would like to be remembered as?
Is it better? Great. Thank you very much. What an easy question. I was hoping to get this one. Thank you. But so important at the same time. And I think that what it helps very much for us in the family business context. I know that in the room, some of you are family business people as well, is that we are constantly thinking about the next decade, just how Farhad started his speech. So we need to have those lenses with us. So what are they then for me? We, at least in TD Gaskets, we have just revisited our ownership strategy, and we have revisited our business strategy, and we hope really to, with smartifying the industry with gasketing solutions, to bring safety and well-being to the industrial world. And in order to do that, we need to combine many things. So manufacturing is the core and essence of how we do our things. So we provide sealing solutions. But I believe that we are capable of embedding smartness to our products. That means that we need to be closely incorporated. In Tampere, where I come from, the second city of Finland, we have a lot of technology companies and all around the world that can help us with that journey. We need to collaborate on that level. It has to do with collaboration with the government, like we discussed about. One example has been that we want to be fully sustainable and carbon neutral by 27, so that there's more of the world and greenness in Finland in the world for the next generation. So we have engaged in a discussion regarding geothermal energy. So what if we could use the green areas of the city, and meaning the below the ground areas, to dig deep holes and bring heat and cooling our processes in our production centers, so that we could benefit something that is not in use, be good to the nature, and also create a policy for the regional government and maybe even for the national government to provide possibility for everybody, for housing companies, for other manufacturing companies and such, to benefit something that exists but is not used, and could also free some capacity from the energy grids of the regional energy company. So being proactive, being part of different ecosystems, being close to the local and national government, and what I have taken from the past generations in our family business, it has always been that you need to go out in the world and discuss with people. You can become more successful when you meet with people and you understand how different things are working in different industries, and you combine those and you make innovations in your very own industry. And I believe that we are somewhat of an advocacy association, or turning into one as family business network. And so I feel also for TD Gaskets that it's not a company that is supposed to be turning only profit, but it's something that our family can use to self-actualize or make the world better. It's just a means or a vehicle to do that. And I believe that as family businesses make up 50-60% of many countries, make up of all companies, we can have a huge impact. Now, if we tap into the ecosystems, just like Farhad said, I think that this is very empowering for the next generation in my family business, in Finland, and in the world as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you so much indeed, Alexei. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you've heard a whole range of opinions covering innovation and IP, how can it be responsible, the whole family business dimension, how do you take it further, and all the dimensions across that, the role of government and the interface, and also a part of the world which is, in a sense, the leader and the benchmark, and how can we look up to it to see what is that we can learn. Floor is open for questions. Please keep your questions short. Do identify the panelist to whom is addressed, and we can take it up from there. I see a gentleman there with a white placard.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. My name is Mukesh Gupta. My question is from Mr. Alaski. So what happens when new generation is not interested in family business? How to maintain the legacy? Is it time to call outsider? If you can address, thank you very much.
Alex, I think the question's to you. Oh, you need the mic, sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. If I understood it right, you're asking that what if the next generation is not interested in the family business or running it? Well, I believe that just when we think about family business, it's not just something that we can decide in a brief moment. Family business and the legacy is something that should definitely be discussed about. These are my very own ideas, but that should be discussed about throughout kind of the life of the next generation, of course, in different ways. In Finland, for example, we have taken some teachings from France where they have written a lot of books even for kids, not just to kind of force them into family business, but rather to understand the values that we have coined so many times here today. And I guess that what the kind of the custodian generation is wishing is only to pass on the values, the way to interact with the world, not necessarily with the very family business that is happening in the family. Another thing that I have learned is also that the family business that you're a part of, it's not the logo on the roof. It's not only that. It takes some time to understand that. I'm sure that for many of you, this is very clear-cut. But for me, it took some time. So that being said, the family business of today can be something very different from the family business of tomorrow. And the discussions that you have over the course of time can help the next generation to understand that of course you should be valuing the legacy, but you should be given kind of the freedom to innovate by yourself, because that's the way how we get the succession right and the family business thriving for the next 100 years. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexei. Before I turn to the lady who had her hand raised, Farhad, would you like to add
Sure.
something?
Yeah, I can just add to that, and that is, I think today it's a big issue that, you know, it's not necessarily true that the next generation is interested in the family business, and what one can do is provide a level of transmission of values to the next generation such that they recognize the legacy of the family business so it becomes more attractive. But more than the family business itself is the tradition of being a family in business, not the family business, but being a family in business. So can you provide something to the next generation which would be attractive to either associate in some way if they're not directly interested in the business itself, but is there something that they can do which could be useful to the business, or that you as a family business, because you have something which is already there and existing, which could be useful to them, to the next generation, to develop their ideas and support their ideas to start something new which is in line with their passion. So that is something which possibly can be done. And we have opportunities more and more today to be able to do that.
Good morning, Doctor. My question is I'm from Bihar, and in Bihar we face a arsenic problem in underground water. Like 40% of districts in Bihar face this problem. So my question is as a young generation, we want to do something about this. So what role we can play to mitigate this problem? As Dr. Catherine will know that this leads to not just physical problem but mental problem also. So anyone who can answer this question.
Sure. So just to understand, sorry, you were talking about doctors, the lack of doctors. Is that what you said?
No, actually arsenic problem in underground water. 40% of districts are contaminated with this. So,
Water problems. Is that
Yeah.
what you said? Okay, and then Jal Mission. Okay, sure. Got it. Sorry. Mr. Gopalan, may I request you to please take that on? Any thoughts?
Well, see, Bihar, there is a good surface water flowing, but there's also a problem of a lot of, water table is pretty high in Bihar. It's not even exploited the way it's exploited in Punjab. Punjab is just, pumping and pumping and pumping. I just don't understand how such a problem should arise in Bihar with massive use of surface water for irrigation purposes. And but problem that can arise perhaps with all Kosi and then flooding the plains at some points in time. I just wonder how can there be a water problem. But even if it is a problem of quality of water which is used for drinking purposes, That is a possible, that's a possible issue, but that requires obviously treatment of water before it is used for drinking purposes. And that's where government should put in a lot of, local bodies should put in a lot of effort there.
Sure. Farhan?
Can I just address that? Because there's an example here which I can use. And actually, it's from Tamil Nadu. You know, in Tamil Nadu, the city of Ranipet they have a lot of tanneries there. And you know, tanneries, there are several small tanneries and some large ones. They're extremely polluting because, you know, when they treat the leather, they use very toxic chemicals. And there was a situation some years ago where all the discharge from these tanneries was going into the ground and actually destroying not only the plant life but animal life as well, and completely all kinds of life. And there was actually then a directive from the Supreme Court to actually shut down those tanneries. But that would have actually meant a massive social problem because of unemployment, because there are tens of thousands of people who are employed there. So what they did, and this was actually an example of partnership, the tanneries, together with the Tamil Nadu government, formed a cooperative where they had what they call common effluent treatment plants. And all the tanneries then would discharge their effluent into these common effluent treatment plants. They would be billed for how much effluent they discharged, okay? And because then it was being treated as opposed to being discharged into the ground, the industry became sustainable. So I'm saying this is the way that, you know, if we work creatively on such solutions, it's possible to actually address these kind of problems.
Thanks, Farhan. I think there was a question here, gentlemen. Yes, please, could we have a microphone there?
Mr. Agarwala, in his opening remarks, briefly mentioned about this model of perpetual economic growth. My question to the panel is this model of perpetual economic growth possible through innovation and best practices, or do you think that there is a need to tone down the aspirations also in parallel?
Great question. Dr. Katrin, I'm going to turn to you.
The hardest question. Wonderful.
Well,
This was actually one of our pre-panel questions, and it's one of those, what we say, wicked problems. I mean, how could we deny the next generation the opportunity to do the things that we had the opportunity to do? Unfortunately, you know, our generation, our parents' generation, as one of the panelists said the other night, we're the ones who polluted the world. It should be our responsibility to clean it up. Unfortunately, that responsibility is being foisted on the next generation, and so we're forcing resiliency from our position of luxury. So we're forcing resiliency not only on our children, but on our children's children, the communities in which our children are going to live. And as a parent of 2 young adults, it's very concerning, that question, you know, how can we rein in growth, which is different than economic development. So economic development is all about, are we feeding are our children being educated? Do they have access to free and sustainable health care, essential medicines, treatment and diagnostics if they become ill? Whereas growth is just, oh, we've made more money this year, right? So how do we, again, get to that balance between encouraging innovation, encouraging new business startups, allowing our children to take those risks? And unfortunately, in Japan, the regulatory framework is so tight, and the taxation actually is so overwhelming that it's a disincentive for young people to take those risks. And so, not to get down into the weeds of tax policy, but that's part of it. So not only are you incentivizing taking that chance and making it well, having some failures, but having the tax policy in place to say, all right, well, if you took a loss, then you can write this down over the next 5 or 10 years. You don't have to completely eat that cost. The government, through, again, distributing the cost of that, is going to have other people share that burden, but also tax incentives to do the right thing for the environment, tax credits and tax incentives so that new businesses and existing businesses have the incentive to do things in a sustainable way as opposed to only looking at that growth part of the profit question.
Thanks. Alex, you had.
Thank you, Banmali. I just wanted to continue on Dr. Catherine's thought and give you the Finnish example. I don't think that anybody really has an answer perfect, or should there need to be one. In Finland, we have tried to answer this difficult question through our independence fund, which is called Sitra. So it's a kind of public-private, more public technology innovation fund that where the government, together with different industrial actors, try to put together vision for the future and bring back from the future what kind of technologies we can turn into business while being sustainable. So the question is kind of shared, and we're trying to find a way how to really make good business while being sustainable. So that's the next era also for Finnish pulp and paper and bioproducts from the forests. That's one of the focal points there. Thank you.
And just kind of, I'll just take one more question after this. I know there's a break, so with the organizers, maybe 2 more minutes. So I'll just take one more question. But just to add to the point that was being made, I do believe in the Indian context, Indian industry needs to do more when it comes to innovation and technology development with a view to improving efficiencies, having more output from fewer or limited resources. I don't think we are spending enough. I don't think we're doing enough. The second area of focus, at least I believe in the Indian context, is around affordability. I think a lot of our innovation has got to deal with bringing down the cost of solutions and make it more accessible, reachable. I think we need to do more. We all know that we need to spend a lot more. That's my take. It's a responsibility that the Indian industry has. Yes, for that lady, I think that will be the last question. Could we just take a microphone there, please?
Yeah, so my question is, how do we motivate people to have PSR, that is personal social responsibility? Because we talk a lot about social responsibility, but finally the organizations and nation is made up of individuals. So how can we motivate PSR? Thank you.
How do we motivate PSR? Anyone? Mr. Gopalan, would you have a view?
Well, it should start from the top. Somehow we need people who have caught the attention of public, and in advertisement we use a lot of known faces to convey messages. So who conveys the message? For doing that is very important. Swachh Bharat program, how the Prime Minister himself did the whole thing and changed some of the personal habits of people, is an example. And it cannot be confined only to that single person. There are any number of public figures who need to really get into this act. And it's a very, very fundamentally very important question. And when I go to some areas, rural areas, I feel very bad. I've really not seeped into the psyche of people. That's a big job.
Sure. So with that, I know there'll be more questions, but I think there's a tea break, so I'm sure you'll be able to interact with the panel members. I'd like to just thank everyone, Dr. Catherine, Farhad, Mr. Gopalan, Alexei, for your presence, for taking all the questions, and thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you very much for your passionate ideas and views, all our speakers and the chair, and for speaking from the heart. May I now request PIC President Dr. Mashelkar and the conference convener, Ambassador Bambawale, to please present our honored guests with the token of appreciation on behalf of PIC. Thank you. Thank you very much. May I request those on the stage to please stay back for a group photo. The audience, we will take a short break, 10 minutes only, please. Do step outside for refreshments, and we'll see you all back here at 11:30. Thanks so much.